I feel like Brian never thought that he was going to be enough.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, about 8 minutes ago, based on the time of this recording, Brian Entin was at the site where Gabby's remains were found, and I am going to be touching on that at the end of this episode. But I'm going to start off with Brian's notebook. Don't expect closure from that, because Brian has contempt for us. He thinks of us as an infection or an infestation. And I don't think he had much love for the world or for society or for people. He seemed to love Gabby and his family, but his family bonds also didn't seem strong enough to keep him alive. As much as we feel Brian did things wrong, it wouldn't be right to think of Brian as all wrong. Brian does have a point about the way we treat the environment. And I don't think the way we deal with that is to either isolate oneself or to jump off the nearest cliff. Instead, we should find ways of joining hands over shared interests. Before we continue, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. Before I get started, I want to make a quick comment about the previous video I put up on Brian Laundrie, where there's been a lot of debate. Some people accuse me of not knowing anything about narcissism, and I think the bottom line for me is whether you are right or wrong about narcissism and whether I am right or wrong about it, to me is less relevant than the fact that we shouldn't be labeling people at all. We shouldn't be labeling people in true crime, and we shouldn't be labeling people in society. And if you have a problem with that, then what about, would you like to be labeled? Do you have a label for yourself? And how is that working out for you? So it's just really on principle that I think there's a lot of complicated dynamics that go into a person, and also complicated dynamics that go into a relationship. And these cannot be summarized by a single word, in the same way that you cannot be summarized by a single word. Your name isn't the full story of who you are, right? And even less so, a label isn't the full story of who you are. And I know this because I've written over 100 books on true crime, and I've often found that the labels given to these cases are wrong. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. So in terms of expecting closure from Brian's notebook, I think, like his Instagram, it does reveal, or his notebook probably will reveal additional areas of interest, influence, and perhaps obsession. Also, what music was he repeatedly listening to? What book was he reading during the summer epic? What art was he drawing during the trip? And what was Gabby doing? So it'll be interesting. I don't think it is a diary. I don't think it is a journal, but he may have left little notes. He may have done little drawings. And certainly when I wrote my story on the murder of Vincent van Gogh, what was so amazing with him was he wrote a letter every single day, and there were little drawings in that. And so you got a very clear indication. It was almost like status updates, but via snail mail, on his state of mind, and also what he was seeing, where he was moving, who he was meeting on a daily basis. So the irony is, more than 130 years after Vincent van Gogh's death, we have a similar situation with an artist, and we're wondering what happened to him. How did he die? And are we going to get a clue to that in his own words, in his own art? So look out for that. So to continue with the analogy from Van Gogh, there was a period where Van Gogh lived with another artist in his yellow house. That artist was Paul Gogh. They were very different and had very different artistic takes on the world. And that is the nature of artists. Artists are different. They have very unique views, very unique impressions, very unique standards, very unique perceptions. But all artists tend to be more sensitive than the average person. Van Gogh painted quickly and outdoors. Gogh painted at a slower pace indoors, and his scenes tended to be allegorical, kind of symbolic, not based on the real world. The friendship came to a spectacular end with Van Gogh losing his ear, his bed soaked in a red substance, you can guess what it was from him losing his ear, and Gogh making a discreet exit when the cops arrived. So at the time that Van Gogh lost his ear, and it was actually a near-death experience for him. When the police found him, they actually didn't think he was alive. And at that very same moment, Gogh exits the scene, never to return. So, you could think, well, were they really such good friends if Gogh abandoned him at this time of maximum distress for Van Gogh? There's more to say about that. If you're interested, I'll put a link to my book in the description. Gogh made a beeline home, just like Brian Laundrie, back to the north of France, similar to Brian, as I say. The narcissism narrative suggests Brian was who he was because he was insensitive, selfish, and uncaring. But I would argue the opposite, that he was too sensitive and possibly cared too much, certainly about Gabby. He couldn't let the relationship go. He couldn't deal with losing her, right? One thing I forgot to mention in my analysis of Brian's narcissism is that bald guys tend to be less narcissistic, simply because they're less good looking, and so they don't have the vanity aspect fueling their narcissism. I'm sure this will open a can of worms all over again, where some people will say, actually no, bald guys are even more narcissistic, but maybe you need to be a bald guy to be that. In any event, he probably also felt he had given too much of himself to her and the relationship to pick the pieces up again when it appeared to be over. How would he ever find another Gabby again? That's probably what he was thinking. Or perhaps he simply felt he didn't have the resources to start again, given the precarious state not only of his world, but ours as well. And I'm not going to take that further, but I do want to talk briefly about Brian Entin. He right now is revisiting key sites from Gabby's summer epic. And you should keep track on Brian Entin's Twitter, if you're not already. I'm sure many of you are. But it is really great investigative reporting from Brian Entin. And now that he's hitting the road, he's taking in some of the sites and milestones of Gabby's summer epic. I think he said that he met the manager of the Merry Piglets, and that he's going to be talking about that quite soon, perhaps tonight. He really gives you a dizzy sense of what it was like out there, describing the scenery as magical, and that he could see why Gabby wanted to go where she went, sentiments echoed earlier by her father, Joe Petito. He also describes plenty of other van lifers doing their thing, and therein lies, I think, an issue. How were they going to stand out? How did they compare as a couple and as individuals, to one another? All of it would be laid bare within the elixir of the great outdoors. And so you come into this spectacular setting, and at the same time that you are moved and stirred, I think there's also a sense of anxiety. Like, how do you convey this? How do you do it in the best way that's comparable and perhaps better than the other people that are there with you, right? Kudos to Brian Entin for visiting the Merry Piglets, as I've mentioned. I've always felt that that's been a stone that's been left unturned. But I do wonder whether the staff have been very helpful, or whether they've been given vows of silence since Gabby's visit, when it made national news. I kind of have a feeling that they're trying to protect the business interests, that they don't want it to become, a spot to avoid. And so perhaps they don't want to be associated with with a crime that happened there. And certainly Moab has felt some of the effects. A lot of the people there are feeling uncertain and nervous, and because what has happened there has never happened there before, and perhaps they don't want the area to be associated with things that are unsafe and the negative news that true crime is associated with. Of course, you get true crime tourism, and I think Ashley Banfield has touched on that, tourists that have wanted to visit certain areas. I do think the waitress serving Gabby ought to know best what the issue was on that fateful day in August when the couple visited. So I wonder whether the manager will ever allow the waitress to talk to us and give her version of events. So taking the cue from Brian Entin, and I must say I've been meaning to do this for quite some time. I didn't really expect the news cycle to be quite as frantic as it has been. But early next week, I'll be taking a cue from Brian Entin and re-looking at the Moab incident in depth, taking it, in 2 or 3 minutes at a time, similar to what I did in the Summer Wells case, doing statement analysis, looking at the nuances in that body cam footage. And that is something, as I said, I've been meaning to do for some weeks now. So look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.